Question. Hello, Kim. How can we become oneness with people in separation? I assume it should mean how can we come into oneness with people in separation? If those are other people, I just walk away. But I mean, my spouse, she is very in the mass consciousness. She's like brand name, gossip, anything like other people. I'm not into any of this. I found Ascended Master teachings and decided to walk the path after I got married. Now I feel like the I that decided to be married is no longer exists, but the choice I made is still here. But some aspect of our relationship is getting better. I noticed that that she transcended some aspect of herself, not as much as spiritual people, but still. I want to hear your opinion. Thank you and very grateful. Well, yeah. When I look back at my time that I've been involved in spiritual movements, I do see this pattern that a person gets married or gets into a relationship before they find a spiritual path. Then they find the spiritual path, and now their spouse isn't interested in it. And so it can give conflicts in the relationship. And I've seen many spiritual people who their relationships broke up at some point. Tension became bigger and bigger. The spouse started resisting their involvement with spirituality. I'm not just talking about Ascended Master teachings, but spiritual people in general. And eventually the relationship broke up. So that's definitely a pattern. I've also seen that some spiritual people have used this as an excuse for breaking up a relationship. In other words, they were saying, oh, my spouse isn't interested, and my spouse is opposing my spiritual growth and my spiritual activities, so I can't stay in this relationship. But that, in some cases, is just an excuse where you don't really want to make the decision to say, I don't want to stay in this relationship anymore. So don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that means you should break up relationships if your spouse isn't spiritual. Because as the person is also saying, everybody is almost constantly changing. So the way I would look at this is that if you're in this situation, be very careful not to create in your mind this idea that your spouse should become spiritual and interested in your spiritual teachings. I would strongly recommend that you strive to become neutral about that, because as I said, it often becomes an excuse. And the person is asking, how can you come into oneness with people who are in a certain state of consciousness? And in some cases you can't, but in other cases you can. It's just that you have to ask yourself, what does coming into oneness with someone mean? And it doesn't mean the outer things, that you have the same opinions, that you believe in the same things, that you do the same activities. I mean, coming into oneness is really a deeper psychological thing, spiritual thing almost. And coming into oneness means you have to look beyond the outer things in order to come into oneness. You're not coming into oneness through the outer things. I mean, I have also seen spiritual people who both were spiritually interested, but both participating in the same spiritual activities, and they still had relationship problems and issues. And even though they were both spiritual, didn't mean they automatically came into oneness. So that's more of a psychological issue. So I guess I would say, clarify what you actually want. If you want to come into oneness, then look at yourself in your own psychology. What stands in the way of you being able to have more oneness with another person? Or if you just mean the outer things, that you want your wife to become spiritual like you are, then I would say, why do you again, I would look at myself and say, why do I feel that's necessary? Why do I feel we need to have this? Could I perhaps find a way so my wife didn't feel threatened by my spiritual activities, and we could actually even talk about it in a neutral way? Well, I'm not trying to persuade her or push her in any way, but I just want to talk about something that interests me. And so that's one thing. Now I understand what a person is saying. You can get to a point where you feel like you were in a certain state of consciousness, you had a certain sense of self when you married. And now, because of your spiritual activities, that sense of self doesn't exist anymore. And that's when you just then have to decide, what does that mean for my relationship? Can I continue in it? Do I want to continue in it? I mean, you have a right to decide, I no longer want to be in this relationship. But I would just recommend that you before you make that decision, you work on your own psychology, because my personal experience has been that if you leave one relationship and go into another relationship, you bring your unresolved psychology with you, and it will affect the next relationship as well. So there comes that point where if you want to be free of that psychology, you just have to look at it. So I think that would be my perspective. I mean, my reaction, or my basic recommendation is always start by looking at your own psychology and resolving as much as you can. Look at the fact that you are married to a person who isn't spiritual. Look at it as an opportunity to look at your own reactions and discover the subconscious selves that are behind those reactions. Then deal with that. What I have often experienced in my own life is that I can be in a certain situation. I'm uncomfortable in the situation. It's stressing me. But the reason why the situation is stressing me is that I have a division in my own psychology, because I have subconscious selves that are fighting with each other. So if I, instead of trying to change the outer situation, which often means changing other people, if instead I look at my own psychology and say, why do I feel stressed about this? I can come to a point where I resolve this. And then what happens is, once I am undivided in my mind, it's almost like one of two things will happen. Either my perspective on the situation will change, and I can now see how to do something I couldn't see before. That's one thing. Or the situation just changes. I mean, circumstances change so that all of a sudden it just becomes obvious what your choice is, or what the next move is. And I've seen that many, many times with myself in various situations. When you're divided in yourself, you're blocking a change in the situation. When you overcome that division, you will see clearly what to do. And what also happens is that sometimes because you're divided, you don't want to make a decision, because you're not sure you're making the right decision. So you don't want to just simply decide, yes, I want to stay in this relationship, or no, I don't. But then when you overcome the division in your psychology, all of a sudden it becomes easy to make that decision. It just becomes obvious, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to do.